Good day. We're learning Tanya Kuntres Acharon, the fifth and final section of the Sefer. We're using lessons in Tanya at this point. It's on page 280. And to recap the Alter Rebbe's question, why is it that Torah, when you learn Torah with the wrong intent, whether it be to self-aggrandizement, to be a rabbi, a scholar, to show off for marriage, whatever the case, the Torah rises to the world of Yetzirah, but regarding prayer, tefillah, it remains below. Why the difference? That's the question. So let's read his answer. So he says this will be understood by reading, by quoting what it says in Shari Yechudim, which is from Reb Chaim Vital, based on the Arizal's writing, chapter 2. What does he say there? By day Torah through the Torah, through learning, when you learn Torah without proper intention, you create angels in the world of Yetzirah, top of 281. And in the Shara Yechudim, he quotes the Zoyar, Parsha Shlach, and the quote is, the less kola, the savid bar kola, the araisa of its leisha, the salak boka, which is, there is no voice lost from this world except the voice of Torah and prayer that ascends and pierces the heavens, but it does not remain below, but ascends. V'hine, the kavonas atfila. Now, through having kavanah tefillah, nivru malachim be'elam abriya, it says you create angels in the world of Bria, kamay b'kavanas atayra, as with the intention or study of Torah. Uvalei b'kavanah, but it says regarding prayer, without kavanah, without intention, nitchis lemata legamri, the prayer is repelled utterly below. Quote, into the lowest heaven. So when prayer is not as it should be, that is, when it is without proper intent, it is banished into the lowest of the heavens that govern the world. The ikrin sleisin psilon, these prayers are called invalid prayers, as the Zohar goes on to say. Next page, top of 282. Va'ayin shom parshas Vayakel, look over there in parshas Vayakel, dafrei shalom base. Quote, Ihi mila kidoka yeyes hulu. If it is a simile word, that means if a prayer is prompted by a proper intent, then the angel appointed as warden of prayers kisses it and elevates it. So you see what happens? Menashe, when you daven with kavanah, the angels that you create, Ari, please mute yourself. The angels that you create kiss your words of prayer. Thus, prayer ascends only when it is propelled by a proper intent. If so, then since Torah and prayer are similar when they are performed with the proper intent, why, when the proper intent is lacking, is Torah still able to create angels in the world of Yetzirah? While prayer without proper intent is repelled into the lowest heaven. So that's still part of the question. That's the question. Answers the Alter Rebbe. Now the question, the difference between the study of Torah and the study and prayer. Shaloi b'kavanah without intent, moving is self-understood. When you learn Torah, you understand what you're learning. If you don't understand what you're learning, you didn't learn Torah. You read Torah, but you didn't learn Torah. Rak, it is only that he's studying neutrally, without the intention of Lishma. In other words, Nasha, you're learning Torah, and you understand, but you don't have the intent that I'm learning for the sake of God. I'm learning for my own sake. I want to have information. Why? I want to be a rabbi. I want to give a good lecture. I want my grandchildren to see that I learned Torah. There's always a selfish motive on some level. But do you understand what you're saying? Absolutely. Let's continue. So, out of a manifest, there's no lishma, out of a manifest love of God in his heart. But only it's out of the latent natural love that every Jew has in his heart. But conversely, are you learning, when you learn Torah not lishma, are you learning it shaloi lishma? On the other hand, he is not studying with an actual negative motivation, such as for self-aggrandizement or the like. In other words, I take that back what I said before. There's three different levels. There's learning Torah lishma. There's learning Torah not lishma, but just learning. And then there's the lowest level, which is learning Torah for self-aggrandizement. The holy solik le'ela min shimsha. For this manner of Torah study does not ascend higher than the sun. It says a posik, right? Akol Hevel tachas Hashem. Everything is under the sun. There's no ein chodesh tachas Hashem. There's nothing new under the sun. So in other words, once it says in Zohar here that this Torah study that is learned for self-aggrandizement is under the sun. In other words, it remains below. It doesn't have an elevation. Hainu mishum shemachshavtoi v'kavanosoi he mislapshes b'oisis adibur. It's because his thought when he learns and his kavan, his intent, are invested in the words that come out of his mouth, ve'einin menichas eisen l'salka le'ila, and prevent them from ascending. The ulterior motive that derives from the klipo thus encumbers his words of Torah. You hear? This is what happens. Moshe, this is what happens. When you learn Torah in such a manner, the klipos, the negative forces, kind of grab your Torah and take your Torah and abuse it. They use it for their shtusim, their narishkeit. So too, when we daven without kavanah, shemechashiv machshava zoras, meaning you entertain alien thoughts. We're now on top of 284 in Lessons in Tanya. But since his intention is addressed to Hashem, he's after all in a state of prayer, except that alien thoughts interpose. When you daven in the morning, whenever we're davening, we know we want to daven to Hashem. All of a sudden we're thinking about what's for supper. How many bills do I have to pay? Where do I have to go to drop off my kids? Right? All of those thoughts are interposed into your davening. But your general davening is focused on, I'm davening to Hashem. Therefore, it has an easy way to be corrected. And through the correction, it will return and it will ascend, it will rise again. When? Now listen to this. When you'll daven one tefillah, one prayer, tefillah milukotes mitfilas kol hashana, and the tefillah can be gathered from all the tefillahs that you daven throughout the year. So let's say this morning, I davened one little part. I told you this last week that I had kavanah, and tomorrow another part. And so throughout the year, you end up having kavanah by every part of tefillah. So that's all gathered for your sake, and it makes a positive impact on the spiritual realms. Look, I'm going to read the note now. When on one day, one passage of the prayers was read with proper intent, and on another day, another passage, and so on, and then all these passages are gathered together, thus constituting one complete prayer from the prayers of a whole year, then all of one's prayers throughout the year are elevated. That's a fantastic, fantastic idea. And it's based on the Zohar. Okay? Which goes of a Mikdash Melech, as it says in Mikdash Melech on Parshas Pekudei, as it says over there. 1 second, we're still in the middle. Now, this is a rhetorical question. As to what it said in the Zohar Parshas Pekudei, that prayer without proper intent is repelled into the lowest heaven, indicating that it is allowed to rise at least to that point. Now, we're saying that tefillah without kavanah doesn't rise. So he asks a question, Moshe, from another section of the Zohar, which implies that it does rise. In Parshas Vayakel, the Zohar, it implies that dafki ihi mila kedoyos, that only if it is a simile word, solkin imo ad avila denikili lo, it is the appointed angels ascend with it to the atmosphere of the heavens alone. How does this latter passage accord with the previous quoted statement, that even when the prayer is without proper intent, it still ascends at least to the lowest firmament? So he's asking a question between two Zohars that seem to be contradictory. We're in the middle of page 286 now. He says this contradiction is not problematic. For the expression in Pekudei that the lowest heaven of the heavens that govern the world refers to Malchus Dasia. Let me just finish reading. Or the Parshas Vayakel and the statement of Parshas Vayakel, the Zod Dasia refers to the Midos of Asiya, Zerampin, not Malchus. Which goes to Beitz Chaim, Shar Hashem is Perikei, Gabi Zod Dasia, Ayin Sham, look over there. So what do we have from all this? It's apparent in Parshas Pekudei, the Gam Tefillah, Psula, Oila, Ad Heichel Arishan, that even an invalid prayer, a prayer whose intent is confused by alien thoughts, ascends to the first chamber, whence it's hurtled down, and this chamber is in Zohar Bria. It would thus seem that even an invalid prayer is elevated to Zohar Bria. Like Kashemidi, so the Rebbe says, this is also not a question. Shariafilu kol avonos mamish, even all sins, kalois, vachaburais, lenient sins, and stringent sins, oilus l'sham, they ascend to Zohar of Atzilus. Afilu ad heichel adalit, even to the fourth chamber, which goes of the foundational base of Medalef. Elavadai. I'll explain some. You can't compare. The answers are this. This is his answer to the questions. The fact that there seems to be contradictory statements between Pekudei and Vayakel and the Zohar, says one implies there is an ascent and the other one implies there's no ascent. So his answer is you have to know a rule, an important rule which we've said in the past and repeats it here, that the essence of ascensions are not identical. And there is no comparison or similarity between them, except for the common name, the elevation of good actions means that they are actually, page 288, uplifted to higher degrees of holiness, where they accomplish whatever they are intended to accomplish. With regard to sins, however, the elevation is to the highest worlds brings about a blemish there. Then in the second chamber, skip the Ulai Tzorech Liyas is Damen Hamemuna, maybe it should have said there is to be found one appointed over the garments that clothe the soul as a result of the performance of mitzvahs. The bracketed Hebrew here text offers several variations. Possibly a text should read, there is found the one appointed, or possibly it should read, the garments are housed. Okay. Even though the mitzvahs performed And by extension, the soul's garments that are fashioned thereby are in the lower God Hayden of Asiya, as stated. Nevertheless, it's basically the elevation of the soul to the soul of Bria. Yeah, okay. I'm not going to go into all this because this is very Kabbalistic. I want to just answer the question, explain the answer to the question. The question is why, when you daven and you don't daven, and you daven for, you don't have a good davening, the davening remains below. And when this happens, there's no answer to your tefillas. Versus Torah learning ascends to the world of Yitzira. V'hinei, we're in 289, in the middle of the page. V'hinei tefillah psula, invalid prayer, is superior to Torah studied with a distinctly improper intention. Shehi tachas Hashemesh. Torah that's studied with an improper intention, Moshe, is under the sun. Under the sun is a negative thing. Right? We have that quote that I mentioned earlier from Mishlei. Ein chadash tachas Hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. Under the sun represents the world of negativity, the world of klipa. Vatfila higoyrakia. Compared to prayer, invalid prayer, it is into the heaven, albeit the lowest heaven. Torah stam, but what if you learn Torah just plainly, ordinarily? It's not that you're learning Torah shalom lishma. Rak me'avamus teres tibius. There's an inherent love in a person's neshama, and the love expresses itself in learning. Right? Lo gora mehevel piyan shel tineka shel beis rabo. This is not inferior to the breath of children learning. The solek le'elam neshu hevel shebochet. Moshe, when children learn, they don't know any stories. They learn just for the sake of learning. And we say that children learning, that is under bar and bas mitzvah, is hevel she'ein bohem chet. It is air, hevel, that has no sin associated with it. It's pure. It's agendaless. You know, when we learn and we're always concocting ideas, how, when, maybe, who, right? Children are not that way. So the Alter Rebbe says, when we learn Torah, when we adults learn Torah, not shaloi lishma, which means specifically not for the intent of the Torah, but for self-aggrandizement. I should be a rabbi and a scholar. My grandkids should know that their grandfather learns Torah. All that is self-aggrandizement. But just for the sake, we learn because our neshama inside identifies with Torah. Afim hu shaloi lishma mamish, meyireh haritzua shebiyad hasefer. Here he says, even if you learn Torah because of the fear of the whip, in the same way, an adult whose study is of neutral intent is not tainted by sin, which it would be if it had studied for an ulterior motive. And therefore it ascends heavenward. So, what do we have from all of this? Let's look. If you have the lessons in Tanya, there's an addendum here. And the third paragraph on page 290. The previous Rebbe, towards the bottom of the page, once recalled that when his father, the Rebbe Rashab, taught him the above text, he first explained, on top of 291, that the angels' elevation of the Torah study of these children to Atzilus, cited above from the Zohar by the Alter Rebbe, relates to the same rarefied level as the spiritual unions that are accomplished by those who refine their bodies according to the secrets of the Kabbalah. Wow. The Rebbe Rashab then added that the Alter Rebbe's emphasis that this study comprised breath made untainted by sin can be explained as follows. This is the breath of Torah words spoken by little children in artless simplicity. When they say, for example, Kometz Aleph Ah, and they believe with a simple and ingrained faith that these and likewise all the other vowels and consonants of the Torah were transmitted to Moshe and Har Sinai, then the very breath that emanates from their hearts is utterly pure and untainted by sin. This commentary, continued the Rebbe Rashab, comes as an addendum to the plain and primary meaning of breath untainted by sin, that these children are still pure from the taint of sin. Moreover, the above interpretation of breath being untainted by sin, and as much as it emanates from uttering words of Torah with simple faith, applies not only to children, but to adults as well. Then they too can effect sublime supernal unions. The Rebbe Rashab based this interpretation on a story he heard from the Baal Shem Tov when he visited his holy resting place in Mezebush. At that time, the Baal Shem Tov related that on his 16th birthday, Chai Elul 1714, he had found himself in a small village. The local innkeeper was a very simple person who hardly knew how to read the prayers, the davening, let alone understand what they meant. He was, however, a very God-fearing individual. On all matters and at all times, he would quote the same phrase in the holy tongue. Blessed be he, may he be blessed. Baruch Hashem, that's the Hebrew. His wife, too, would always say in Yiddish, praised be his holy name. Gebencht is the Namen von Gott in Yiddish. That day, in accordance with an age-old custom of meditating in solitude for some time on one's birthday, the Baal Shem Tov went off by himself to the fields. He recited chapters of Tehillim and engaged in unifying the divine name that emanates from its holy verses. Top of 292 in Lessons in Tanya. As I was immersed in this, the Baal Shem Tov related, and unaware of my surroundings, I suddenly saw Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi. There was a smile on his lips. I was taken aback. For when I had been with the tzaddik, Reb Meir, and also when I had been in the company of the hidden tzaddikim, I had merited to see Eliyahu. The Baal Shem Tov said this. But this was the first time that I had merited his appearance while all alone. Usually, by Shemayers, when the Baal Shem Tov saw Eliyahu had a vision, it was while someone else was with him. But here, he was himself in the field, and he had a vision of Eliyahu. I wondered about it, and besides, why was he smiling? Eliyahu said to me, you are toiling so mightily to have the proper mystical intentions in bringing about the supernal unions of the divine names that emanate from the verses of Tehillim. And Aaron Shloima, the innkeeper, and his wife, Zlata Rivke, know nothing of the unifications that result from his blessed be he, may he be blessed forever, and from her praised be his name. Yet, the divine harmonies that this simple folk that they create resonate in all the heavens, more than all the unifications of the holy name that are affected by the mystical intentions of the greatest tzaddikim. You hear that, Chevra? and you say Tehillim, and you say it with a sincere heart, and you don't know all the mystical intentions, it's greater than the tzaddikim that say it, and they know exactly this and that, and which name of Hashem and all that. Because the sincerity of the heart goes straight to Hashem. Eliyahu described to me, continued the Baal Shem Tov, the great pleasure, as it were, that results in heavens from the words of praise and adoration uttered by men, women, and children, especially so when they come from the mouths of simple folk, and most especially when these praises are offered consistently, for then these people are constantly united with Hashem in pure faith and with undivided heart. Having recounted this episode, the Rebbe Rashab added that it served as the basis for his additional interpretation of what it says over here from the Zohar, breath unattained by sin, that it applies not only to children, but also to adults who act with pure faith and heartfelt simplicity, and who are thereby constantly united with Hashem at all times and in all places. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, stresses that this applies equally to adults, top of 293, with respect to effecting supernal unions. Listen to this. With regard to maintaining the world's existence, however, it is clear from the above quoted teaching that in Shabbos that it is accomplished only by the breath of the mouths of school children, for this breath possesses as well the first quality of breath untainted by sin. It proceeds from those for whom sin is a virtual impossibility. With regard to the refinement of the world, this is accomplished by those adults to whom the second exposition of breath untainted by sin applies, that the breath itself is unattainted. In a sense, indeed, their breath has an even greater effect than the breath of the mouth of the school children. For as the Rebbe Rashab further explains, children do not relate to the corporeality of this world, but only to its atmosphere. Since adults have a relationship with the corporeality of this world as well, the supreme unions that they affect refine its very crassness and corporeality. Rabbi Isai, Chevra. So the Alter Rebbe here in this essay, which is very Kabbalistic, and he reconciles contradictions in the Zohar. But as far as we're concerned, we walk away with this lesson. As far as the lesson is, Chevra, that when you daven, you need to daven with sincerity. In other words, not to look for fascinations in your davening. Talk to Hashem like you talk to your own parent, your own child, your own sibling. You talk your heart out. That's what davening is. Now, it doesn't mean Breslov Hasidus, speaks about meditation and solitude, then you should talk to Hashem. That's outside of prayer. And davening doesn't mean necessarily you have to talk, but the machshava, when you say the words, if you want to talk, you feel motivated to talk, and that's your business. No one can tell you it has to be exactly this way or exactly that way. I told you the story, and I repeat it. There was a chassid in 770. His name was Shmuel Schneider, Shmuel the tailor. He was from Moscow, and he had a tailor shop, or he was a tailor. And in his old age, he was a little senile or had dementia, whatever the case. And in the winter, he would wear tefillin, and it was already shkia, sunset and getting dark, and he was wearing this tefillin. So the Bachrim in 770 said to him, Shmuel, this is tunkel and dreisen. It's dark outside, like them tar up the tefillin, take off your tefillin. So he answered them the following. It's a profound answer. He said, and this is someone who's like already has dementia and senility and all that, but his answer shows that in this regard, he knew exactly what he's doing. He said, If you daven to the sun and the moon, you're all right. It's dark, and I'm not supposed to wear tefillin. But if you daven to Hashem, you can daven with your tefillin even when it's dark outside. This is not a halachic answer, but it's an attitude. You understand? But you have to. It's very easy to fool yourself. I just heard yesterday. Rabbi Lazar asked Rabbi Malo of Shodden, who was the main Rav of Kranites in the 1980s, 90s. And so he asked him, because I guess he saw some, Bacharim who, if they're davening after Chatzos, what do they do with Tachnun? Because the Tachnun doesn't apply, or the Tachnun of Shachris doesn't apply for Mincha. Now that it's after Chatzos, and you're davening Shachris, what should you do with Tachnun? So Rabbi Malo said to him, wait a second. If you're davening Shachris, you don't daven after Chatzos. And if you daven Shachris, you say Tachnun, but not after Chatzos. After Chatzos, you don't daven Tachnun, you daven Tushmon Esrei for Mincha, as it says in Shulchan Aruch, right? So I'm saying, Reb Shmuel's answer wasn't a halachic answer. I want that to be clear. But on a spiritual level, it's the concept. We daven and we come to Mincha and Ma'ariv and Shachris and we have to do it. We do it. But we have to never forget to daven to Hashem. It shouldn't and talk to the Eibishter, for everything. In the section of praise, you have to praise Hashem. And give gratitude, give gratitude. Think about your life. Where did you grow up? How did you get here? What are you doing? And how the nature, right? The Hurim, the mountains and the grasses and the stars and the sun and the moon, everything that we say in Psukei de Zimra. And you come to Birchas Krishma, you talk about the Malachim, their bittul, then you have Krishma, Mesiras Nefesh, B'chol Ma'idcha, and there's Shmon Esrei, which is silence and on the deepest and highest level. So it's very important to be sincere. I don't know if you guys went through it, but years ago, I remember, especially in Yeshiva in Morristown, the Baal Tshuva Yeshiva, Tiferes Bachurim, guys came in off the street and they started to learn and grow, but they didn't know yet how to read Hebrew. We were told, read in English, daven in English. Now, at some point, you hope that you are able to read more in Lashon Kodesh, in Hebrew. But certain tefillas, like Kol Chamira, right? Erev Pesach. If you don't know what you're saying, you didn't say anything. You weren't Mavakel the Chometz. If you read Kol Chamira in Aramaic and you don't know what you said, you have not done bittul. And it's very important to do bittul, right? Because what if you find something during Pesach, right? So if you did bittul, then midaraisa, biblically, you're not guilty because you mavakel it, you made it ownerless. But if you don't understand that you're making it ownerless, you didn't make it ownerless. It's not abracadabra here. And the same is true with Hataras Nedarim, Erev Rosh Hashanah. You're asking a bezdin to be mater neder. What are you saying? Do you know what a neder is? Do you know what a chinum and then a kol nidri again? The kol nidri is only a kind of a repeat, whatever, of Hataras Nedarim. But Hataras Nedarim, which halachically is more important than kol nidri, more important halachically, because that's an inyan of annulling your vows and your pledges. And that's a serious, that's a halachic issue. And you read it, you don't know what you're saying. But you're showing everyone you know Hebrew. Thank you very much. So at least look into the English, try to learn beforehand as much as you can to know what you're saying. So what I'm saying is that we'll learn today's shiur, although it's very Kabbalistic, most of it, but what we walk away with is the importance of making tefillah personal, and that's why, at times the rushing in tefillah is not is it's contradictory to what tefillah wants you, what Hashem wants with tefillah. You're supposed to pray for your needs, so you have to know what your needs are, and who am I asking my needs from? Chevra, have a great day. We'll see everyone tomorrow. Seid gesund. Bye bye. Take care.